The year is 71 BC. The road outside Capua is crowded, not with travelers, but with silence. You can hear sandals on dust. You can hear a cartwheel complaining. You can hear birds that won't land too close. And then you see the line of wood stretching into the distance. Posts, crossbeams, a message built out of geometry. Rome calls it order. Rome calls it justice. But if you're a slave, especially a woman who dared to fight back, you understand what it really is. It's a warning to your bones. Because Romans didn't end rebellions by winning battles. They ended rebellions by making survival feel impossible. And what they did to rebellious female slaves was worse than you imagine. Not just because of the punishments, not just because of the spectacle, but because Rome understood something terrifyingly modern. If you can control what people believe will happen to them, you can control what they do. So today on Wacky History, we're going into the part of Rome most movies treat like background scenery. The machinery, the rituals, the legal tricks, the humiliation designed to travel faster than any legion. And here's the twist. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't a few cruel masters. It was policy, cold, deliberate, repeatable. By the end, you'll see why Rome didn't just conquer provinces. Rome conquered decision-making. Welcome back to Wacky History, where the past is real, the people are unhinged, and the good old days are usually a lie. Now, before we talk about what happened to rebellious female slaves, we have to talk about the world they were trapped in. Because Rome wasn't built on marble. Rome was built on labor. And a huge portion of that labor was enslaved. Not one type of slavery. Not one story. A whole spectrum, from household servants in a wealthy villa to bodies swallowed by mines where daylight was a rumor. Rome had words that made it sound clean. Property, possession, discipline. But for the people living it, especially women, the cage had extra bars. A female slave wasn't only a worker. She was also vulnerable to being used as leverage. Her body could be treated as a tool for profit, for punishment, for control. And when women rebelled, when they ran, fought, poisoned, burned, organized, refused, Rome didn't just see a crime. Rome saw a contamination. Because a rebellious slave didn't just threaten one household. She threatened the idea that the entire system was natural. Here's what that means in real life. In a Roman city, status is oxygen. Your clothing tells people where you belong. Your hair tells people where you belong. The way you walk, the way you lower your eyes, the way you speak, those are all signals. And enslaved women were trained to send one signal only: submission. So when a woman breaks that script, when she runs, when she strikes, when she refuses a command, the shock isn't only to the master. It ripples out into neighbors, other households, other slaves. It tells people something dangerous. The system can be challenged. That's why Roman punishment had to do more than hurt. It had to rewrite reality. So let's set the scene the way it actually felt. Imagine you're on a rural estate outside Rome, the kind with neat rows of vines and olive trees that look peaceful from a distance, the kind of place that sells itself as civilized. The morning starts normal, work teams, overseer shouting, the rhythm of labor that makes time disappear. Then something breaks. A storehouse burns. A foreman doesn't come back from the fields. A key ring goes missing. The dogs start barking at a nothing. And when the master realizes slaves have coordinated, women included, his fear isn't polite. It's primal. Because deep down, he knows what happens if the enslaved stop pretending. He sends riders. He sends messages to the nearest town. He pays for muscle. And sooner or later, the machinery of the Roman state turns its head toward you. Now add the detail most people never picture. The smell. Not the romantic smell of ancient Rome. The real smell of sweat trapped under wool. Of smoke from a kitchen fire that never fully goes out. Of livestock, damp straw, dirty water. The sound of chains when someone moves too fast. The overseer's stick striking wood just to remind everyone it exists. In that world, a rebellion doesn't look like a heroic movie charge. It looks like whispers behind a wall. It looks like a woman hiding a tool under her dress. It looks like a glance that lasts 1 second too long because you're communicating in a place where words get you killed. Slave catchers, local militias, sometimes soldiers if it spreads. And here's where worse than you imagine begins. Because Rome didn't only chase rebellious slaves to stop them. Rome chased them to learn from them. Who helped you? Who hid you? Who else is thinking about trying? The Roman obsession wasn't just punishment. It was prevention. And prevention requires information. Which leads to the next part. Interrogation. Rome had a word for it that sounds technical. Questioning. But enslaved people knew what it meant. It meant pain used as a tool. It meant forcing names out of mouths so the network could be cut. And for women, the threat was layered. Rome could punish your body and your reputation at the same time, turning you into an example people would whisper about with fear and disgust. Point. That's not an accident. That's strategy. Now we have to be careful here, because ancient sources are uneven. Rome recorded a lot, but not with compassion. The voices of enslaved women rarely survive in their own words. So what we often have is Rome describing itself through laws, inscriptions, elite writers bragging about discipline and the art of look what happens if you try. But the pattern is unmistakable. When a female slave rebelled, Rome aimed at 3 targets: her body, her identity, and her future. Because if you can destroy those 3 things, you don't just punish one person. You teach everyone else to police themselves. And that teaching often started with public humiliation. Romans understood crowds. A crowd can be entertainment or a weapon. So punishments weren't always hidden in a back room. They were staged. You don't need to imagine a giant arena every time. Sometimes the stage was smaller and more intimate, which can be worse. A courtyard, a marketplace, the entrance to an estate, the road where everyone walks to fetch water. The point was visibility. This is what happens. Then came restraint, not just to stop you from running. Restraint as symbolism. Collars, chains, ropes. In Roman thinking, a rebellious slave wasn't merely disobedient. She was out of place. And the restraints were Rome reordering the universe in front of witnesses. Sometimes, collars even carried messages, literally turning a person into a walking sign. Imagine the psychological cruelty of that. You're not only controlled, you're advertised. Then came the legal erasure. Romans loved paperwork because paperwork makes cruelty feel legitimate. A rebellious slave could be reclassified, sold away, dispersed, separated from children, siblings, lovers, because separation is an efficient way to kill rebellion without killing bodies. And if you want the rebellion to die permanently, you don't let the rebels stay together. Now we get to the part that people don't like to talk about, because it's not cinematic. It's administrative evil. Rome had places designed to break people through labor alone. The mines, the quarries. Work details so punishing that sentence and death started to look like the same word. For rebellious slaves, men and women, being sent to hard labor could be a punishment that erased you without a public execution. You disappear. No martyr, no rallying story, just absence. But for women, Rome had additional ways to weaponize life itself. A rebellious woman could be forced into conditions meant to humiliate her status permanently, made into a living contradiction of whatever dignity she tried to claim. Point. And we're going to speak responsibly here. The ancient world normalized sexual coercion within slavery. That means Rome could punish a rebellious woman by routing her into exploitation that didn't leave a neat execution record but did leave a lifetime of control. Point. That is part of why this is worse than you imagine. Because the punishment wasn't always a single event. It could be a new reality. A long punishment you wake up to every day. And Rome liked punishments that lasted. But Rome also understood the power of the grand example. When a rebellion became public, when it spread, when it embarrassed the state, when it threatened the idea of Roman control, Rome responded with theater so loud it echoed across provinces. Point. This is where you see crucifixion on roadsides. This is where you see bodies displayed where travelers can't avoid them. Not because Rome loved killing, because Rome loved deterrence. And here's the psychological detail that matters. A quick death is a tragedy. A prolonged, visible death is an instruction. It tells every enslaved person, every poor citizen, every allied community. Look long enough and you'll learn. And if you're a rebellious female slave, being displayed wasn't only physical suffering. It was public stripping of personhood. The crowd doesn't see a woman with a name. The crowd sees an object used to teach a lesson. That's why Rome could seem orderly while doing things that are morally feral. Because the violence is wrapped in the language of law, discipline, and example. Now let's zoom in even closer, because this is where the story gets truly dark. The Romans didn't just punish rebels. They punished the idea of rebellion inside the household. If you're enslaved, your world is built out of surveillance. Someone is always watching. Someone always has the power to report you. And when a rebellion happens, Rome doesn't want to punish one body. Rome wants to infect the whole system with fear. That can mean collective consequences. Households interrogated. People punished for knowing. People punished for not stopping it. Because fear spreads faster when it feels unfair. If you know you can be punished even when you didn't lead the rebellion, you stop taking risks. You stop trusting. You stop organizing. You stop speaking. And that silence is exactly what Rome wanted. That's why the Romans didn't only crush rebellions in the fields. They crushed them in kitchens, in sleeping quarters, in the private corners where enslaved women traded whispered survival tips. Rome didn't just want compliance in public. Rome wanted obedience inside your imagination. So what does a rebellious female slave actually look like in Roman reality? Not a single stereotype. Sometimes it's a woman who runs. Sometimes it's a woman who refuses. Sometimes it's a woman who helps others escape, who hides food, who passes messages, who turns the household's own routines against it. Sometimes it's quiet sabotage, oil spilled near a lamp, a lock jammed, a ledger ruined, an overheard plan accidentally repeated to the right ear's point. Sometimes it's public defiance, spitting at an overseer, striking back, or standing between someone else and punishment, and forcing Rome to choose whether to escalate. And here's why women terrified Rome when they rebelled. Because enslaved women were often placed close to the inner life of the household. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, textiles, intimate spaces where secrets live. A rebellious woman there is not just an enemy on a battlefield. She's a threat inside the home, where Roman men believed they ruled absolutely. So when Rome punished rebellious women, it wasn't only about stopping that one person. It was about reasserting dominance in the most personal arena imaginable. And now we get to the harshest truth. Rome's cruelty wasn't always more than other empires in raw violence. The ancient world was violent. No one gets a clean moral trophy here. What made Rome feel worse, what made it stick in people's throats, was how normalized it was. How routine it became. How it was baked into law and custom and daily life until whole cities could walk past a human being used as a warning and still call themselves civilized. That is the horror. Not only that cruelty existed, but that it could be systematized and defended as necessary. Because once cruelty becomes normal, it becomes invisible. And when cruelty is invisible, the victims don't just suffer. They vanish from memory. That's why stories like this matter. Not to indulge in darkness, but to refuse the lie that Rome's greatness was pure marble and speeches. Greatness, for Rome, often had chains attached. So let's answer the headline directly. What did Romans do to rebellious female slaves that was worse than you imagine? They didn't just punish them. They converted rebellion into an anti-rebellion machine. They used public humiliation to teach crowds. They used restraint as symbolism. They used paperwork to erase identity. They used separation to break networks. They used forced labor to make people disappear quietly. And they used selective, visible terror to make sure every other enslaved woman watched herself before Rome even had to. That's the genius of oppression. It tries to make you participate in your own cage. And here's the part that should keep you awake. It worked. Not forever. Nothing does. But long enough to make resistance feel irrational for most people most of the time. And if you think that sounds familiar, you're not crazy. The tools change. The uniforms change. The language gets nicer. But the strategy, the cold math of fear and compliance, shows up again and again in history. So what do we do with this story? We don't flatten enslaved women into background characters. We don't treat rebellion like a footnote. Because every act of resistance, running, refusing, helping someone else survive, was a human being insisting they were more than a property. Point. Rome tried to answer that insistence with spectacle, policy, and erasure. But the fact we're talking about it now means something important. The machine didn't get the final word. If you want more of history's darkest, strangest strategies, told straight, told responsibly, and told with that wacky history edge, hit subscribe. Point. Because the past isn't just what happened. It's why people stopped resisting. And sometimes, the most terrifying part isn't the battle. It's what the empire does after the battle to make sure no one tries again.